The Birth of a Nation. America's Rise to Power narrator in 1492. Christopher Columbus stumbled upon the America's End encounter that would reshape the world. What followed was a brutal era of conquest, colonization, and conflict, as European powers carved up the New World. Centuries of war and ambition culminated in the birth of a new nation on July 4, 1776, the United States of America. Since then, the U.S. has dominated the globe militarily, economically, and culturally, with the strongest military in history and countless groundbreaking achievements. It has earned its title as the modern Roman Empire. But can this superpower maintain its reign? To understand America's story, we must go back to the beginning. The first Americans, long before Europeans arrived. Native peoples had built thriving societies across North America. Complex governments, trade networks, and cultures had flourished for millennia. By the time European explorers reached these shores in the 15th century, indigenous nations had already shaped the land for thousands of years. Europe's first contact, a vast, resource-rich continent, drew explorers like a magnet. The first known European to arrive was the Norse navigator, Leif Erikson, who sailed west from Greenland after hearing tales of a mysterious land from fellow explorer Bjarni Herjolfsson. Had accidentally spotted Newfoundland after being blown off course but never landed. Erikson, however, established a small settlement called L'Anse aux Meadows Cove in Labrador around the year 1000. Yet, after just 2 decades, the Norse abandoned their outposts. Nearly 500 years would pass before Europeans returned. The age of exploration. By the late 15th century, Europe's great powers were racing to find faster routes to Asia. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, funded by Spain, landed in the Caribbean, believing he had reached India. Instead, he had unwittingly opened the door to a new era of exploration. Florentine explorer Amerigo Vespucci later mapped the coastline, dubbing it the New World, a name that stuck. Soon, Spain, England, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, and Sweden were scrambling to claim territory. Early colonization and conflict. The first European settlements faced brutal challenges: starvation, disease, and violent clashes with native tribes. Roanoke, 1585 to 1590. England's first attempt at a colony mysteriously vanished, leaving only the word Croatoan carved into a post. Jamestown, 1607. The first permanent English settlement survived, thanks to strict leadership and trade with the Powhatan people. Plymouth, 1620. Puritan pilgrims, seeking religious freedom, established a colony with the help of the Wampanoag, leading to the first Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, the Dutch founded New Amsterdam, later New York. The Spanish expanded from Florida, and the French claimed the Mississippi River. The struggle for control colonies grew. So did tensions. European powers clashed in a series of brutal wars. King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, a devastating conflict between New England colonists and the Wampanoag Confederacy. The French and Indian War, 1754–1763, part of the global 7 Years' War. This struggle ended with Britain dominating North America, but at a steep cost. The seeds of revolution. Victory came with a price. Britain, drowning in war debt, imposed harsh taxes on the colonies without their consent. The Stamp Act, 1765, a direct tax on printed materials, sparked outrage. The Boston Massacre, 1770. British troops fired on a mob, killing 5 colonists. The Boston Tea Party, 1773. Patriots dumped British tea into the harbor in protest. The rallying cry became, "No taxation without representation." A nation born by 1776, the colonies had had enough. On July 4th, they declared independence, igniting the American Revolution. Against all odds, they defeated the mighty British Empire. From these turbulent beginnings, the United States rose, transforming from a cluster of struggling colonies into the world's most powerful nation. But could this young giant sustain its dominance? The answer lay in the battles, betrayals, and bold ambitions that shaped its destiny. Asterisk, asterisk, the spark of revolution. From Tea Party to independence, the Sons of Liberty retaliated against the Tea Act by raiding 3 British merchant ships in Boston Harbor on December 16, 1773, disguised as Mohawk warriors. They dumped 342 crates of East India Company tea into the water, a loss worth $1.7 million today. This act of defiance, later dubbed the Boston Tea Party, enraged Parliament. The Intolerable Acts, 1774. In retaliation, Britain passed the coercive acts called the Intolerable Acts by colonists. Boston Port Act shut down Boston Harbor until the destroyed tea was paid for, punishing the entire city for the actions of a few. Massachusetts Government Act stripped the colony of its charter, banned town meetings, and placed it under direct royal control. Administration of Justice Act allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England. Far from colonial juries, Quartering Act 1774 forced colonists to house British soldiers in private homes. These laws backfired. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, they united the colonies. The First Continental Congress convened in September 1774, demanding repeal and organizing a boycott of British goods. When King George III ignored their petitions, tensions reached a breaking point. Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. April 18, 1775. British General Thomas Gage ordered troops to seize colonial arms stockpiled in Concord. Patriots Paul Revere and William Dawes rode through the night, warning militias, "The regulars are coming." At dawn on April 19th, 70 Minutemen faced British troops on Lexington Green. Captain John Parker ordered his men, "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon." A single, mysterious shot rang out, the shot heard round the world. The British opened fire, killing 8 colonists. The British marched to Concord, but found most supplies removed. On their retreat, militias ambushed them from behind stone walls and trees, inflicting heavy casualties. The revolution had begun. From rebellion to revolution. Initially, colonists fought not for independence, but for their rights as British subjects. The Second Continental Congress, May 1775, appointed George Washington, a Virginia planter with military experience, to lead the new Continental Army. June 1775, Battle of Bunker Hill. Militias inflicted massive British casualties, but lost the ground. Proved colonists could stand against professional troops. Winter 1775–76. Henry Knox hauled captured cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, forcing the British to evacuate by March 1776, declaring independence by 1776. Reconciliation seemed impossible. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, galvanized public opinion, arguing monarchy was tyranny. On July 2, 1776, Congress voted for independence. July 4 saw the adoption of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, proclaiming, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The war for survival. Washington's army suffered defeats in New York, 1776, but rallied with daring victories at Trenton and Princeton. The tide turned in 1777. Saratoga, Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates forced a British surrender, convincing France to ally with the U.S. 1778. Valley Forge, 1777–78. Baron von Steuben drilled troops into a disciplined force. Yorktown, 1781. French naval support trapped Cornwallis Army. His surrender effectively ended the war. A fragile peace and a new constitution. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, recognized U.S. independence. But the Articles of Confederation proved too weak. Economic chaos and rebellions, like Shays' Rebellion, 1786, exposed the need for a stronger government. The Constitutional Convention, 1787, drafted a new framework, 3 branches: executive, legislative, judicial with checks and balances, Federalist versus Anti-Federalist. Debates led to the Bill of Rights, 1791, Washington's presidency, and beyond, 1789. Washington became the first president, setting precedents like a 2-term limit. Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. Washington crushed resistance to federal taxes, proving the government's strength. War of 1812. Despite burning Washington, D.C., victories like New Orleans, under Andrew Jackson, cemented U.S. sovereignty. Manifest Destiny and westward expansion. 19th century saw relentless westward movement. Indian removal. Act 1830 forced the Trail of Tears, displacing native tribes. Oregon Trail. Thousands braved disease and hardship to reach the Pacific. Gold Rush, 1849. The discovery of gold in California sparked a frenzied migration, legacy from a defiant Tea Party to a continental empire. The U.S. forged its identity through conflict and expansion. The Revolution's ideals, liberty, self-governance, and destiny shaped a nation poised to dominate the modern world. Westward expansion and rising tensions as American settlers pushed further west. Violent clashes with Native American tribes became frequent, requiring permanent U.S. military outposts across the Midwest and West Coast. Meanwhile, in the Southwest, the Texas territory originally ceded to Spain became part of Mexico after its independence in 1801. To boost population and deter native raids, Mexico offered cheap land to American settlers, many of whom brought Southern customs, including slavery. When Mexico abolished slavery in 1829 and banned further U.S. immigration, Anglo settlers ignored the laws, soon outnumbering Mexican-born residents. In 1834, General Antonio López de Santa Anna seized power, dissolving state governments and imposing a dictatorship. Texans, both Anglo and Tejano, rebelled in 1835, the conflict's most famous battle. The Siege of the Alamo, February-March 1836, ended in a massacre of defenders like Davy Crockett and James Bowie, but became a rallying cry. Weeks later, Sam Houston's victory at San Jacinto secured Texas independence. By 1845, Texas was annexed by the U.S., sparking the Mexican-American War, 1846-48, over disputed borders. President James K. Polk provoked conflict by sending troops into contested territory, leading to Mexico's defeat. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo forced Mexico to cede California, New Mexico, and Arizona for $15 million, fulfilling America's manifest destiny but deepening divisions over slavery's expansion, the Slavery Crisis, and Civil War. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, and Compromise of 1850 temporarily preserved balance between free and slave states. But violence erupted in Bleeding, Kansas, 185459, as pro- and anti-slavery settlers clashed. Radical abolitionist John Brown's 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry aimed to arm enslaved people, but failed, making him a martyr. The 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican opposed to slavery's expansion, triggered Southern secession. By April 1861, Fort Sumter was bombarded, igniting the Civil War. The Confederacy, led by Jefferson Davis, initially outperformed the Union, but Ulysses S. Grant's Western victories, for example, Vicksburg, 1863, and William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea crippled the South. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation 1862 and the 13th Amendment 1865 abolished slavery. After Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Lincoln's assassination by John Wilkes Booth left Reconstruction to Andrew Johnson, whose leniency allowed Southern resistance black codes, Ku Klux Klan, industrialization, and the Gilded Age. the Transcontinental Railroad 1869, and Homestead Act 1862 accelerated westward expansion. Displacing Native Americans, Battle of Little Bighorn, 1876. Wounded Knee, 1890. Industrial titans like Rockefeller and Carnegie amassed fortunes, while workers faced exploitation, leading to strikes. Haymarket Riot, 1886. Pullman Strike, 1894. Reformers, muckrakers, like Upton Sinclair, the jungle exposed corruption, spurring progressive-era reforms. 16th Amendment, 1913. Federal income tax, 17th Amendment, 1913. Direct election of senators, 19th Amendment, 1920. Women's suffrage, imperialism, and World War I. The U.S. expanded globally. Hawaii, 1893. Overthrew Queen Liliuokalani. Annexed 1898. Spanish-American War, 1898. Splendid Little War, won. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines, Panama. Canal 1914. Engineering marvel, costing 5,600 plus Levzine. 1917. The U.S. joined WWI after the Zimmerman telegram and Lusitania sinking. The Treaty of Versailles 1919 was rejected by the Senate, leaving the U.S. out of the League of Nations. Roaring Twenties and collapse. The 1920s boomed with consumerism, cars, radios, jazz, Louis Armstrong, and Prohibition 192033, which fueled organized crime, Al Capone. However, the stock market crash 1929 triggered the Great Depression, worsened by the Dust Bowl 1930s. The Great Depression and New Deal 1929 to 1941. Dust Bowl 1930s. Ecological disaster worsened economic hardship, driving mass migration from rural plains to cities. Hoover's response: limited government intervention due to Republican ideology, exacerbating public discontent. FDR's New Deal, 1933 to 1938. First 100 days, bank reforms, industrial agricultural stabilization, and job creation. For example, WPA employed 8.5 million people. Legacy: infrastructure, Hoover Dam, Bay Bridge, Social Security, labor protections, Fair Labor Standards Act. Criticism: conservatives decried government overreach, especially after the 1937 recession. 2. World War II, 1941 to 1945. Pearl Harbor, 1941, prompted U.S. entry. Japan's failure to destroy carriers led to the pivotal Battle of Midway 1942. European theater, Operation Torch 1942. Allied invasion of North Africa, D-Day, 1944. Normandy landings marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's collapse. Pacific theater, island hopping, brutal campaigns, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, isolated Japanese forces, atomic bombs, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forced Japan's surrender, saving lives but killing 129,000 to 226,000 civilians. Homefront, war production boomed. Japanese internment Executive Order 9066 reflected wartime. Xenophobia. 3. The Cold War, 1945 to 1991. Origins: U.S.-Soviet tensions over ideology, capitalism versus communism, and nuclear arms race. Key events: Berlin Wall, 1961, symbolized East. Divide stemmed defections from communist East Germany. Cuban Missile Crisis 1962. Near-nuclear war over Soviet missiles in Cuba, resolved via diplomacy. Proxy wars, Korea, 1950 to 1953, and Vietnam, 1955 to 1975, as battlegrounds for ideological influence. Domestic impact: Red Scare, McCarthyism, persecution of suspected communists, Hollywood blacklists, loyalty oaths, nuclear anxiety, school drills, bomb shelters. End. Soviet collapse 1991, under Gorbachev's reforms. Reunification of Germany, 19894. Civil Rights Movement, 1950s, 1960s, Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. Upheld separate but equal doctrine, entrenching Jim Crow laws. Brown v. Board, 1954, overturned school segregation. NAACP's legal victory inspired grassroots activism. Challenges: voting restrictions, economic discrimination, and violent resistance to integration. Legacy: global superpower, World War II, and Cold War cemented U.S. influence, but with ongoing debates over interventionism, social progress, New Deal, expanded safety nets. Civil rights movement laid groundwork for equality battles, technological and ethical shifts. Nuclear age redefined warfare. Cold War spurred space race and tech innovation. This era reshaped America's role in the world while confronting deep-seated inequalities at home, a tension that continues to define its history. Civil rights movement, 1950s-1960s. Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, ended legal segregation in schools, but faced massive resistance. Montgomery bus boycotts, 1955–1956, sparked by Rosa Parks' arrest, led by Martin Luther King Jr., and ended segregated bus seating. Little Rock 9, 1957, federal troops enforced school desegregation in Arkansas, sit-ins, and freedom rides. 1961, nonviolent protests against segregation in public spaces. Birmingham Campaign 1963, protests, police brutality, and negotiations led to partial desegregation. March on Washington, 1963, MLK's I Have a Dream speech galvanized support for civil rights. Civil Rights Act 1964 and Voting Rights Act 1965 banned discrimination and protected voting rights. Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, escalated under Presidents Johnson and Nixon. Massive anti-war protests, for example. Kent State shootings, 1970. Pentagon Papers, 1971, revealed. Government deceit ended in 1975 with North Vietnamese victory. 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese died. Space Race 1957-1975. USSR launched Sputnik, 1957. First human in space, Yuri Gagarin, 1961. U.S. founded NASA, 1958. Landed on the Moon, Apollo 11, 1969. Ended with U.S.-USSR cooperation, Apollo-Soyuz, 1975, closing parenthesis, 1970s. Social change and political turmoil, postmodernism, skepticism of universal truths. Watergate scandal, 1972 to 1974. Nixon resigned over cover-ups. Economic struggles, oil crises. Stagflation. Iran, hostage crisis, 1979-1981. 52 Americans held for 444 days, 1980s. Reagan era and conservative shift. Reaganomics, tax cuts, deregulation, trickle-down economics. Cold War escalation, aid to anti-communist groups, Contras, Grenada, closing parenthesis. AIDS crisis, government neglect until late 1980s. War on drugs, harsh penalties, crack versus powder cocaine disproportionately targeted black communities. 1990s, tech boom and globalization. Gulf War, 1991. U.S.-led coalition expelled Iraq from Kuwait. .com. Bubble 1995-2000. Speculative tech investments crashed, but companies like Amazon survived. Clinton presidency, economic growth, but scandals. Monica Lewinsky, 21st Century Challenges, 9/11s, and War on Terror. 2001 to 2021. Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Great Recession 2008. Housing market collapse. Obama's recovery efforts. Obama presidency 2009 to 2017. First black president. Affordable Care Act. Trump era 2017-2021. Polarization. COVID-19 mismanagement. Capitol riot January 6, 2021. Biden presidency 2021. Present. Pandemic response. Ukraine war support. Domestic divisions. Modern America 2020's COVID-19 pandemic. Over 1 million U.S. deaths. Political strife over mandates. 2020 election and insurrection. Trump's false fraud claims led to Capitol attack. Ongoing issues, political polarization, racial justice movements, climate change, AI and tech advancements. The U.S. has weathered immense challenges: slavery, civil rights struggles, wars, economic crisis, yet has continually adapted. Its diversity, innovation, and democratic resilience remain defining traits, even as it faces new tests in the 21st century.